Hello, and welcome to the Exponential Growth Podcast, powered by Analyst Investors. I'm your host, David Olivencia, co-founder of Analyst Investors, and a passionate advocate for leveraging innovation and technology to drive success. In this podcast, we'll dive into the strategies that top leaders, investors, and entrepreneurs are using to navigate and thrive in this era of accelerating technological change. Whether you're looking to lead more effectively, make smarter investments, or understand how to harness disruptive technologies for exponential growth, this podcast is for you. Each episode will feature conversations with visionary thinkers, industry pioneers, and innovative leaders who are redefining what's possible in today's rapidly evolving world. So if you're ready to start and stay ahead of this curve, let's get started. This is Exponential Growth. All right, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Exponential Growth Podcast. This is a very special one. I've known this great leader probably about 10 years or so. And there's a little bit of context for the listeners. You know, the thesis of this podcast is about exponential growth. And through my career, I've been in technology, I've traveled the world, lived many different places, and been around many technology and innovations. And what I do with this podcast is really trying to look at all this exponential growth, trends that are growing really rapidly, and try to educate our users on what are these trends, how do you best invest in these trends, and how do you best lead? Well, that leads me to this. The title of this show is the Exponential Growth of Northwest Indiana, or what we call the region and one region that we're going to talk about. We have an amazing guest, a leader that I've known a while. He's actually in my book around networking and networking excellence, with some really actually pretty cool stories. Welcome to the podcast, Matt Wells, the CEO of One Region and the Chief Engagement Officer of Purdue Northwest. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks so much for having me, David. It's always great to see you, my friend, and love the work that you're doing with the podcast and all of the great content that you've been pushing out. And it's an honor to join you today.
We're gonna have some fun. I'm really excited about this. Look, I'm doing this from Bogota, Colombia. I have a team out here. I'm in the venture industry. Born in Northwest Indiana, right outside of Chicago, which we're gonna talk about Northwest Indiana. And some amazing announcements that just came out. But a very much global perspective, lived around the world, lived in New York. And I've seen a lot of the world, and now I live back in Northwest Indiana. And there is some amazing exponential opportunities that our region is really, really blessed to have in terms of assets, in terms of announcements. And so, Matt, let's start out, and just for our listeners out there, just tell them a little bit about you, your background. I know most of it, actually some pretty interesting, cool things in there. I don't know all of it, but just give, like a 5-minute overview of your life journey and what's brought you to your leadership role at One Region and being the Chief Engagement Officer at Purdue Northwest.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me start by saying, what I do now is a lot different than what I thought I was going to be doing 20 years ago. So, maybe to your point about I have some unusual things in my background, I won't bury the lead. I actually used to be a professional opera singer. So, you're in South America. I'm out in Arizona near Sedona. And, had I stayed on that path, I probably would have been doing as much travel as I do now, but for a very different purpose. So,
we won't ask you to sing, but maybe we will.
Maybe that's a different podcast, but so that's always a fun little fact, and it's mostly a skill that I employ as a party trick now. But when I was growing up in Central Indiana, on the west side of Indianapolis, I'm a born and bred Midwesterner, native Hoosier. I really didn't have a sense of the possibilities that um, a place like Northwest Indiana really had, going for it. Honestly, having grown up in Indiana, I didn't know really anything about the region other than it was that place that you drove past that had all the steel mills on your way to Chicago. And so, um, as I kind of think back as my career's evolved, starting out in music and then transitioning into working in higher education, first with private Lutheran school in Valparaiso University, then ended up over in the Purdue system. A lot of my work over the years has been just iterative in figuring out, what the opportunity landscape was in front of me and doing what I needed to do to take advantage of that. And so I've been with One Region now for a little over 3 years. I had been on the board before that, and was asked to step in as the CEO in 2023. But it's been
And Matt, we're just let's pause right there. So
yeah,
One Region, the audience is global,
yeah,
national. Probably even the people who live in Northwest Indiana may not know
yeah,
what like One Region, what the organization is. So maybe just little,
yeah,
what is it?
for sure.
And yeah,
Yeah, so we are we're really a civic organization that is comprised of about 75 CEOs, family offices, managing partners of firms, philanthropic foundations, university presidents. You can think of it similar to, in our backyard, you get the Commercial Club of Chicago with the Civic Committee. And, that's a group that for 100 years has been really kind of the organized voice of the private sector, helping to shape the growth of the city of Chicago. So we've kind of built a similar structure that's been very much focused on the northern Indiana portion of the Chicago metro area.
so
Um,
very senior leaders
right.
across the region that are focused on shaping the future
That's
of
right.
Northwest Indiana. Yeah.
That's right. And so, a lot of the work that we do, is very much focused on, providing a level of thought leadership and convening power, aggregating local capital, figuring out, what are the ways that all of us collectively can move the needle in a way that perhaps some of the individual communities in our part of the world don't necessarily have the resources to do on their own. Because when you think about Northwest Indiana, um, the way that it's developed over the last 120 years is it's really a collection of a lot of very small to mid-sized cities and towns that collectively represent a very large population center that is, right on the south and east side of the city of Chicago. So it's a sizable regional market, but there's not a single city with more than 70, 76, 77,000 residents. And so, that presents some really unique opportunities and challenges because what our group has been focused on is how do you aggregate all of those different assets that each of those communities have and really put it into a formula that makes sense when you're trying to speak to the global market of why what's the case to invest here, or what's the case to move my family here. And so I've been really looking forward to this conversation because when you think about exponential growth, we've seen it before in Northwest Indiana, and I think we're about to see it again. And One Region is really trying to put a lot of energy and momentum behind attracting new business investment, new households, new population, to really see that demand curve, accelerate the way that it did in the first wave of industrialization in the United States 120 years ago. So,
Well, and you talk about those who are seeing it, right? And major announcement today,
yeah,
the Chicago Bears, and have, to your point, they've had some options, they've looked at some options, and I think this is maybe the first domino in the exponential growth. Like they've kind of seen it, they've seen the opportunity, and there's a lot of what I'd call exponential growth seeds. But this major announcement today, and you've got a little bit more background on it. You can, there's some things you can share, and maybe some things you can't. But share with our the audience here, and again, global, national. What is this Chicago Bears? They just announced it today, Northwest Indiana. What is this? What does it mean? How did it happen? And I would say one thing that this is well, I guess it's not a done deal until they're actually playing the game there.
Sure.
One of the
Yeah.
things I would say though is, if you look across the United States, there's a lot of political divisiveness.
Yeah.
And this is one thing that I would say that, and I think it's a role model for the whole United States, where
Yeah.
Republicans and Democrats came together and made it happen, congratulating each other, shaking each other's hands. Who knows? Maybe even kissing each other. Who knows? But
Yeah.
Matt, how did
Probably.
this? How
Yeah.
did this? Give it a look. What's the importance of this? How did it
Yeah.
happen? Give our listeners out there the
Yeah.
background on this thing.
Um, so this is consequential in ways that I think, will be felt for many, many years, regardless of how the process continues to unfold. But the Chicago Bears announcing today that they are moving forward with developing a world-class stadium in Hammond, Indiana, is something that no one, even probably 3 or 4 years ago, would have thought remotely possible. And yet here we are. And I think for me, first and foremost, what this is it's a validation of a lot of things that we've been out kind of promoting, this notion that the metro Chicago economy, which by the way is the third largest metro economy in the United States, that Northwest and Northern Indiana, really even stretching over to South Bend and Notre Dame, it's kind of like two lungs of the same body. You've got Metro Chicago, and then you've got the industrial corridor along the lakefront in Lake Michigan, and that 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 idea of an integrated economic corridor is something that's hard for politicians to embrace because it's always a little bit of red state, blue state, this town versus this town.
Yeah,
But
they care about their own little,
that's right.
own little
Because
area, right?
because that's the nature of politics. You're rewarded by
Yeah,
the voters in your jurisdiction. But when you get the private sector really talking effectively about things that are not necessarily dictated by political boundaries like a state line, but they're looking at the market as a whole. Um, it really proves the case. The Chicago Bears looked at this from the vantage point of what the market assets were, not necessarily that the concrete is going to be poured in Illinois versus Indiana. Um, and this is, again, goes back to what really was the driver of the growth of this area over a century ago when, Daniel Burnham, famous, urban planner architect, make no small plans,
yeah,
created the first integrated city master plan in U.S. history that was commissioned by the Commercial Club of Chicago. It's the 1909 Plan of Chicago. And it envisioned that the city itself would be Paris on the prairie. It would be this globally significant center of commerce and culture, and the industrial corridor where all of the jobs and the people would sort of go and work was on this really optimal part of the Lake Michigan coastline, which, by the way, just happens to be the only natural barrier between New York City and the West Coast. All of the infrastructure, whether it's the Class One railroads or the interstate highways or the long haul fiber that connects the two major trading centers, New York and Chicago, all of that had to bend around the southern end of Lake Michigan, which is why
yeah,
J.P. Morgan and Andrew Carnegie and Charles Schwab and the like, in the first wave of industrialization, that's why they built all of the steel mills here. That's why they built all of this, transportation and logistics capacity. It's truly the crossroads of North America, and that's something that is, I think, being rediscovered for the next economy. And this is just a huge market signal, I think, to the whole world that there is an opportunity landscape in Northwest Indiana that allows you to have access to the entire Chicago metro economy, but have some benefits of perhaps being on the side of the state line that's got a lot of room for growth. It's got a lot of land for redevelopment. Indiana's been very aggressive in tax and regulatory policy to try to stimulate growth. I have to, hats off to the governor and the Indiana Finance Authority for shepherding and negotiating this deal over the last several months. So it's for me, it's like the first, like you said, it's the first domino. I mean, it's like, something that just makes people's heads spin. I mean, I've been,
yeah.
I've been texting with, one of the reporters from Bloomberg, and in the last several hours, I mean, my phone's just been exploding from folks all over the world that are, trying to make sense of this, that, this part of the map that up to this point has not been very well known.
Right.
sort of in the shadow of Chicago. If they know anything, it's maybe, yeah, there's some steel mills there. Maybe they know the city of Gary, and, Jackson family, et cetera. But it's hard to overstate how big of a deal this is.
Well, and it's funny. I mean, it is the city of Gary. That's where I was born. My family comes here from Puerto Rico with nothing. I've done okay. And now I'm in this venture capital world where I invest in startups that are looking to disrupt, grow exponentially, and give investors, a great return, phenomenal return. Um, but you got to see, I had this amazing view, and actually I studied all my schooling was in Indiana, a lot of it in Northwest Indiana, between Notre Dame, Bishop Knoll, St. John the Baptist, and Whiting, right? Actually, where the Bears are going to play. It's right where I grew up.
I
It's
say your
exactly
high school football team might end
right,
up
right,
playing
right
in
back.
that stadium.
So to the listeners out there, I've had an amazing career where I look at technologies that are shaping the world, and growing and creating all this disruption, whether it's AI, robotics, what's happening in medicine and medical, energy. I mean, there's so many different exponential curves. I've even written things on space. Look at what's going on in space, and you'll see a major initial public offering IPO from SpaceX later this week. So I get to see all this stuff that's happening in the world, this amazing amount of growth. You look at Anthropic. Anthropic, I think they're going to do in revenue like $400 billion a year. They're going to IPO. They're going to be $1 trillion company. So they're throwing out B's and billions and trillions like it's
Yeah.
nothing. But there's all this core of technology that's making it happen. And I'm talking about this because when you look at Northwest Indiana, and you look at call it the first wave, the
Mhm.
infrastructure we laid out for steel, the power, the real estate, the landscaping, and this whole reshoring, we're there is a huge demand for AI and data center and compute. There is a huge demand for longevity and health, and we've got a beautiful health corridor in Munster, a lot of hospitals, a lot of health there. We're connected in this quantum computing, which is just amazing. We've got amazing universities, not only that are within our Northwest Indiana, but then you go to you expand a little bit out. So we have all these amazing assets that I think position us to be, one of the leading areas in the world when you look at all this wave of technology disruption. Look, if we could launch spaceships from Lake Michigan, that might better position us. But Matt, you're a lot more detailed into this. Talk about what this kind of reshoring and whether it's quantum, whether it's data centers, whether it's health. Talk about what is this reshoring? Why should the listeners out there care, or why is Northwest Indiana the best positions place in the world to take on this work?
Yeah, well, I mean, you hit the nail on the head, my friend. I mean, that is, the case you just articulated. Those same assets that were extremely valuable in the first wave of exponential growth of industrial development in northern Indiana are extraordinarily relevant again. Big reserves of industrial land, huge capacity for electrical power, and the ability to scale it quickly.
Because these data centers can compute,
Yeah,
they need like almost infinite power.
yeah,
Power is like the limiting
yeah,
factor to make
we're
these
starting at like
compute.
a gigawatt right now. Yeah, I mean, there's,
Yeah.
and the the power demand continues to rapidly increase. The availability of fresh water. I mean, we've been our group has really been on a journey over the last couple of years, and I've been very fortunate to organize and fund an effort which we've been calling the Greater South Shore Initiative, which essentially is sort of like a refresh of the Burnham Plan that was the guiding kind of vision document that set the area in motion many, many decades ago, but bringing that kind of up to date for a modern economy. And so, we have been working with some of the top firms in the world. This has been, led from a planning perspective by Adrian Smith and Gordon Gill. Some of your listeners will probably be familiar with their projects like the Burj Khalifa in Dubai and the Jeddah Tower. They're probably best known for building the world's tallest and most innovative buildings, and also designing the most innovative city scale and nation state scale economic master plans. So I mean, truly the best minds in the world, Burrow Happold and Newmark, and a lot of just really, really exceptional talent has sort of coalesced around this idea of repositioning the Northwest Indiana market to take advantage of those trends around reshoring and nearshoring. The reality is,
By the way, that's amazing because they have choices of where the heck they
oh
can
yeah,
spend their time and what they can design
yeah,
on. These
yeah,
global national figures said,
yeah.
there's something special here in
Here in the
Northwest
region, yeah,
Indiana that
yeah.
I want to be. I want to put my
Yeah.
fingerprints on this thing.
Yeah, and it's been a passion project. I mean, a lot of these folks have been working on this, before we were even able to, raise the funding to get the initiative really moving quickly. Put in years of pro bono work, really, because of the opportunity that everyone sees in this corridor. And when you think about reshoring, which has been a very hot topic, in U.S. trade policy and corporate site selection decision making. Um, the world has dramatically changed in the last few years. I mean, we could see it coming, if you were looking far enough, down the horizon in the early 2000s. But when you think about, in the post-war period from, the late 1940s until the fall of the Soviet Union, the system of global trade that was built in those decades um, enabled, rapid growth in the developed world and lifted, billions of people out of poverty and, created technology that, really changed the way we live and in just about every way. What we've been seeing, particularly, I think, since the early 2000s is, I think the world has become increasingly multipolar. There's a much higher degree of militarization. You see conflicts, whether that's Russia and Ukraine, whether that's what's going on in South China Sea. The world is fundamentally different, and the global economy and system of global trade is fundamentally different because of geopolitics and geoeconomics. Um,
Yeah,
no longer is the highest weighted factor in where a company opens a plant, just cost of labor and speed to market. Those
yeah,
things
yeah,
are largely gone, and I think that's a durable trend. It's not necessarily, certainly tariff policy plays a role in that, but I think that's durable across, political administrations, where companies are now starting to think about supply chain resilience. They
yeah,
have
totally.
access to, uh, you know, uh, a large labor shed, and everything's really, really big right now. It's not, places are not competing, for those small, scale investments that are in the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. Places are competing for investments in the tens to hundreds of billions of dollars, and
Totally.
that's been shaped by market forces. And so when you think about the sheer scale that's required, whether that's a massive build out of hyperscale data center campuses, or bringing semiconductor and chip production back to the United States, and capturing the next wave of big compute uh, hardware production. Um, the places that can do that, that can replicate, for example, what you see in Shenzhen, um, but do that in the United States, there's like three. It's not, it can't be done everywhere. You need to have,
Yeah,
access to, again, large reserves of industrial land, enormous capacity to scale power, access to a large supply of fresh water, and a huge labor shed. Well, when you think about metropolitan Chicago, it checks every one of those boxes. There's not another major American city that also in its backyard has one of the most, significant large scale industrial corridors on the planet. And so when you think about places that are going to win and that are going to see a lot of that, the global economy is going to create between now and I think 2040, something along the lines of another $125 trillion in global GDP. The whole of humanity, the whole history of humanity up to this point has generated about $100 trillion in global GDP. So, talk about exponential growth in the next 15 to 20 years. You know, the challenge, and I think the opportunity, is places that get organized are going to win a disproportionate share of that that economic growth. And I think, what we've seen and what we've been doing, telling the story and backing it up with, a lot of data and a lot of analysis, a lot of ongoing conversations, with the big players in the market, both whether that's sovereign wealth funds or, global F100 CEOs. We're out telling that story about Northwest Indiana and the role that it's going to play for the not just the next 3 or 5 years. We're not thinking about things in quarters. We're thinking about things in decades and what that means, from a standpoint of job creation, household income in a particular place that has enormous significance to U.S. economic competitiveness and national security. So,
And I'm going to write, I do a weekly newsletter where I write about exponential trends. This weekend, I'm going to put out something on chips, right?
mm,
These are the little engines that power your computers. They power cars, they power airplanes, but they power all this compute that's around AI, and and that growth has been exponential. It's been crazy, and it's not slowing down. They can't produce them fast
yeah,
enough.
yeah. Moore's law's got some room to run.
It's got so much
Yeah,
room, and we're finding out. And then as AI takes over, you're going to get more. But to the viewers out there and listeners out there, you're limited by where you can produce these chips and how fast you can crank up the chip producing capacity. And as you talked about it. There's a lot of dependency right now on Taiwan,
yeah,
and there's geopolitical risks there. So there's this whole, our government, and this is I think spans multiple administrations, wants to move this. Yeah, you want to create, you have energy, chips, data centers. It's like these layers of the cake that then give
yeah,
us
that's right.
this amazing advantage to compute. So that's where the world's going. Everybody who's listening, it is about energy, chips, compute. At least, and it will impact every industry. I don't care what industry you're in. It is going to impact it one way or the other. But but taking it back to Northwest Indiana, it is there will need to be chip factories in the United States. But in order to produce these chips at scale, you need mega power. You need industrial land. You need access to water to kind of cool these things. And whether it's the chips or the data centers or whatever, if you look at the United States, and the world, there's very few places in the world that have kind of ready built infrastructure for this. So what you're going to see, and Matt, you have more access to, there might be some things you can share and some things you can't share. But there's major global companies that that are looking at Northwest Indiana to produce chips, to create data centers. I mean, we're seeing the data center thing, and I love your opinion. I have my opinion on data centers. These are going to create jobs we could never imagine that were created at the early, maybe 3 times, 4 times, 5 times the amount of jobs that were created early at the earlier century.
Yep.
What can you share that you're aware of in terms of the negotiations, why they're coming here, potentially which companies, if you could,
Yeah.
what's obviously Amazon? I think everybody knows Amazon's here, but what can you share, Matt?
Yeah, so obviously there are a lot of things I can't get into, but what I can say is we've seen just rapid increase in interest and demand for the large scale industrial property that exists, particularly on the industrial lakefront in Northwest Indiana. We're getting calls from companies that, again, 3 or 4 years ago, no one would have thought would have even had us on the radar. I mean, and again, it's when you pull all of those assets into a story that makes sense and speaks to the market, in a language that they understand. You see the pent up demand for those assets, and so when I think about the um, the data center topic specifically, obviously that's been a huge growth sector. In fact, I mean, the US GDP would have been negative last year were it not for the dramatic investment by,
And the jobs
big
number
tech.
that came out
Right.
today, a huge
Yeah,
part of that
right.
was the data
It's
center
it's
build
over.
out.
Right. And so, and that's got room to run. I mean, we have we've been able to do some pretty deep analysis and forecasting on what the net new job growth will look like in Greater Chicago and in Northwest Indiana, um, specifically related to quantum information science and technology, which again is still nascent, but scaling quickly and really accelerating. It's um, commercial
Yeah, and for our
potential.
listeners who like they may not even know what the heck quantum is,
Yeah,
I'll give mine, and then Matt, feel free to jump yours. You have chips that can do a certain amount of compute capacity today, and it's amazing, right? You go to Chat GPT, or any of these AI, you put something and you get an amazing answer back, but that's all powered by chips. What quantum computing does is take those chips and the power of those chips and what it's able to produce and multiply it by like thousands of what the type of compute and how fast they can.
yeah,
So these are the engines that are going to be able to solve problems that you never could even the human brain almost cannot even think
yeah.
of.
That's right. Yeah. Well, and it's an entirely different paradigm of compute. So when you think about classical computing, dating back to the days of vacuum tubes and early transistors. I mean,
Punch cards and stuff.
exactly, yeah. Everything is binary. I mean, it's 0 1 0 1. I mean, literally the medium that you and I are interacting with right now is just flipping on and off switches at an outrageously rapid pace, to respond in real time, to if then. But when you think about quantum computing, it's not just, better or faster classical computing. It's an entirely different method of computation, which doesn't rely on zeros and ones being on or off at a given point in time. A quantum bit, so, a binary digit, a bit is either 0 or 1. And that's always the case. It could be a 0, it could be 1, it could be, a quantum bit at any given point in time is in a state of indeterminacy where a quantum bit could either be 0, 1, or neither, or both. It's kind of like the best analogy, that I've heard. And again, bear in mind, I probably only know just enough to be dangerous, but is like a coin spinning. It's neither heads nor tails while it's spinning until you stop it and
Yeah.
observe, its state. And so, what a quantum processing unit does, classical computing, every single operation is sequential and, is running it may run, um, you know, 10 million operations really, really quickly, but it's doing it one at a time. What a quantum processing unit does is it has all of those gates essentially open at the same time, running simultaneous computation. And so it becomes, it's more kind of a probabilistic rather than a deterministic method of
Hmm.
compute. But what that means is you can solve certain problems, not every problem. I mean, there are still going to be things that, classical computing, CPUs, GPUs do a lot more effectively than quantum processing units. But there are certain problems, really complicated problems that would take a classical computer, tens of thousands of years that once quantum computing gets to a certain level of, coherence and fault tolerance and error correction, it'll be able to do things in, a matter of seconds or minutes that would not even be possible even in the most advanced, classical supercomputers. And the problem domains that are most likely to be impacted are like optimization problems. Like think about like scheduling hundreds of nurses for a shift on a hospital on multiple floors, being able to do that, almost instantaneously. Computational fluid dynamics, predicting how things, particles will behave at a subatomic level, and cybersecurity. I mean, honestly, that's the scary one when I think about,
Yeah.
the vulnerabilities of our information security grid. Depending on who you talk to, Q day, I'm thinking echoes of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
echoes
When
of
it can break in,
Y2K, right?
when that
Um,
because it's to the listeners out there, right? This thing gets so powerful,
yeah,
it can
it
break
can break
into
all of our existing
passwords
encryption.
and
Yeah, that's right.
security and all that kind of stuff. And
That's
so
right.
there's an element that's out there. But taking that back, so there's a lot of technology behind it. But what is that to the people who live in Northwest Indiana? What quantum computing means, like there's very few hubs in the United States.
Yeah.
Like AI is big right now, it's a big boom.
Yep.
San Fran, a couple other
Yep.
places, Silicon Valley, the leaders of it. Quantum, this region, from Chicagoland all the way through Notre
Yep.
Dame has a bunch of assets where this is where the region led the world in steel and refinery in the 1900s. We believe this next century that we're one of the areas that we're positioning ourselves is quantum, right?
Yeah,
And
that's right.
so and that comes with some of these chip manufacturers that
Yeah.
we're in conversations with. Um, uh, and the other area of quantum that I want to touch on, where I think the region has an asset, that is, I was talking with somebody, they said, what, if you were talking to some of the leaders, what would you say? I said, let's say, look, we're going big in quantum. We have an asset in healthcare, I think. We got some
Yeah.
phenomenal hospitals, we got great universities, we got
You got Eli
orthopedics,
Lilly in
we got
Indianapolis.
Eli
You got
Lilly,
AbbVie in Chicago. Yeah.
yeah, and we just got all of that, and then we got this
Yeah.
nice little Calumet corridor,
Yeah.
you know. But healthcare is, and so you take, so imagine quantum. I mean,
Yeah.
what they are doing with data on, call it the human genome, our blood, disease, the things that
Personalized
they're all
medicine. Yeah.
personalized medicine.
Yeah.
If everybody knew what I knew, what is coming, and this is
Oh,
almost
yeah.
without quantum. This is almost without quantum.
Yeah.
There's some amazing things coming out here. So where do you how what do you 3 5 years out? Where do you
Yeah.
see the big industry? Where do you see how do you for the listeners out there? What are the jobs? What are the industries? What's going on in the region from what you see?
So, our group has, over the last probably 15 months done several pretty exhaustive studies looking at what the implications are for the labor shed, specifically around quantum technology. And the high end projection between now and 2040 is that the greater Chicago area will capture about 190,000 net new jobs just directly related to quantum. Um, of that, if Northwest Indiana, if we kind of over-index on quantum, you might see, anywhere between 40 and 50,000 net new jobs just in the northern Indiana counties. I mean,
That's like a whole
you know,
city. That's a whole
that's
city.
right.
That's
Yeah, I
roughly
mean,
a whole city.
that starts
Like
to
a
look
city of
like,
Highland, I
what
think. A city
that's
of
right.
Highland, Indiana, or my
Yeah.
city's like,
Or,
whatever,
or
50.
or what the steel industry might have had, 50 years ago. And so it's and this comes, from McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, the team at Burrow Happold, and the opportunities, though, what's interesting, it's not just going to be PhDs in computer science and computer engineering. I mean, the labor stack to enable the growth and scale of the entire quantum sector, for every one kind of PhD educated professional in the industry, it's going to require, 5 or 6 folks that have probably a master's level education, 12 to 16 that might have a 4-year degree, and then probably 20 to 30 folks that, have some kind of, credential, and that's not at the sub baccalaureate level. Because when you think about what will enable the growth of the quantum sector, it's not SaaS. You can't do it from everywhere. It requires a lot of physical kit, cryogenics, and and big
Yeah.
data centers, and access to, there's a startup that's been gaining a lot of traction and momentum in Indiana and Illinois over the last couple of years, called Quantum Corridor, which is essentially working to build the first commercially available quantum secure telecommunications network, so that they're building the infrastructure for quantum things, whether that's quantum computers or quantum sensors, to talk to each other in a hyper secure, hyper fast telecommunications network. So there's a lot of physical hands-on things. It's going to require a lot of HVAC technicians and a lot of construction firms, and so it's building the entire supply chain. It's not just looking at a particular layer, and that's got enormous implications for people currently living in Northwest Indiana who might be thinking about, all right, well, what are my kids going to do? All of this chatter about
Yeah.
AI is going to take all of these white collar professional jobs. It's the first time we've seen that kind of disruption, as a result of technological advance. Well, I think we've got an increasingly pretty good answer to that. Is that in every massive wave of technological evolution, there is displacement, no question, and it's painful. And but when you look at the long term trajectory, there are things we can't think of today that you know occupations and entrepreneurial
Yeah.
opportunities that will be huge things in 15 to 20 years. But we can't see it yet. And that's what causes so much anxiety. And obviously that's tied up with public perception around data centers. And it's just, it's remarkable, just the time that we're living in. Um, so much is in flux, but I'm so genuinely optimistic about where things are going, particularly as it relates to the industrial Midwest, because I think, what we've always done really well, which is to make stuff and move stuff at global scale, all of a sudden is super relevant again, and it's going to be for the foreseeable future. So, yeah,
Yeah, well, and look, so for the and those who are, there's those listening nationally and globally, this part of the world, right? You've got beautiful national park, and I've gotten this kick of national parks. I'm trying to like just check them off across the country in my travels. We were talking about uh, uh, the one in between LA and
Joshua
Death
Tree.
Valley. Death
Yep.
Valley. Oh, yeah, and
Yeah.
Joshua Tree.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
did both of those on
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
LA to Las Vegas drive. Just beautiful,
Oh yeah.
phenomenal. The caves in Kentucky, but we've got a beautiful one in the dunes, the sand
Yeah.
dunes. And
Yep.
so, you've got that as a national park. You got the beautiful Lake Michigan. You're so close to Chicago, one of the best cities in the world, one of the greatest cities in the world. And then here's the other thing, Matt, and I wrote an article in the Northwest Indiana Times. I got about 2 million miles flying on airplanes, right? And I wrote an article in the Northwest Indiana Times, maybe 15 years, maybe 20 years ago, just saying that, look, this Gary Airport should be
Yeah.
the Newark Airport of Chicagoland. And this was 20 years
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
And if they would have listened, I think it'd be in a better spot.
Yeah.
Now, that said, I think there's a lot of things that have been done and built around that, but that's
Yeah.
another asset that this area has that can be developed. And you take all these, it's like you take all these assets and it's basically what your role is, right? Looking at all these assets that are in this wonderful part of the world with what's going on in the world, AI, chips, healthcare, supply chain, and say, how do we bridge it, tell the story? And what you're doing is you're telling the story, you've seen the assets, and now what's happening is you get all these companies that are calling you
Yeah.
Amazons, and you can imagine the other
That's it.
to
Yeah.
say, hey, how do I
Yeah.
get there? How do I set up the Bears, right? How do I
Yeah.
get it set up shop?
Yeah. What we've essentially done is, to stimulate the market. I mean, we don't, um, we don't control massive tracts of land. We're not a developer. We have the benefit, I think, of being able to look at a higher altitude, kind of above the local politics, and pull together a joined up narrative that makes sense to potential investors, potential end users, and we've seen a spike in that demand curve for those properties in Northwest Indiana that I think is going to continue. I think the the risk is when you've got all of the eyes of the world on you, which today after the Bears announcement is got a lot of eyes that are looking at
Yeah.
Northern Indiana. Um, it's execution capacity. You can have a great attraction strategy, but you have to also be able to deliver when the projects
Yeah.
come into your sandbox, and that's something that we've really been focused very aggressively on is building sort of a new civic machinery to make sure that there's the technical capacity, the expertise at the local level to be able to know how to navigate when a $100 billion project shows up saying, we want to look at your site. That's something that most places have not had the experience of doing. In fact, we took a group of our member CEOs out to Phoenix back in February and met with the mayor, met with the Arizona Commerce Authority, folks at Taiwan Semiconductor, and the group that was really instrumental in pulling together what has now become the largest foreign direct investment in U.S. history, $165 billion and counting, in the desert north of Phoenix, where TSMC is building multiple fabs, tens of thousands.
Chip fabs. I was talking about
Yeah,
chips.
yeah, the most advanced chips in
Taiwan
the world. Yeah,
Semiconductor,
that's right.
one of the largest companies in the world.
That's right. And what we heard consistently from those business and civic leaders in Phoenix, uh, it took a while. They took multiple swings. It didn't all come together at once. They actually had multiple at bats before they finally landed that first big commitment from TSMC. And I think it was 12, 15 billion. So again, huge foreign direct investment. But now it's scaled to $165 billion over the last several years. So it's there's a certain kind of collective muscle memory that places have to build up to compete for those massive generational investments that are taking shape in different parts of the world. And so that's really, we've spent a couple of years really informing and fleshing out this compelling pitch, this vision, and validating it against the market. We've now kind of moved into a phase where we're really relentlessly focused on execution and making sure that, it's not just stimulating the market interest, but being able to actually bring those projects home. And that takes time, that takes resources, it takes a lot of talent. We've been really fortunate to be able to pull together, again, some of the best firms in the world. We've also been able to poach and poach some talent from other markets, Columbus, Ohio, and former head of the US EDA. And we've just got a really remarkable kind of team of rock stars that are focused every day on driving the regional economy forward. And that for us, I think, is the next big phase, is making sure that effort is durable over a period of years, because these things, as rapidly as capital is being deployed and
Yeah.
big projects are landing, these things take years. They don't happen overnight. So you have to have that civic infrastructure to shepherd it, across a period of time.
Now, and there's kind of 2 points, and then we'll kind of wrap. It's like the you got to be ready when it's happened. I think the Northwest Indiana has landed several data centers, one from Amazon, and there's a little bit of noise I've heard from some of my friends, maybe even some of my family, about data centers and no and all that kind of stuff. And I would just say that, what's the alternative? What's the alternative? And the da- tons of jobs in the creation of it. When it's up and running, maybe not so much, but that's when it's tons of revenue because you're getting all the
Yeah.
compute. That
Yeah.
revenue, it will be insanely transformational for the cities, the schools, the civic security, the infrastructure will be transformational, and you can be innovative and create agriculture on top of these. You can create bars, put lipstick on that
Yeah,
thing,
use
put lipstick on
recaptured
them
heat
things.
to heat homes nearby. I mean,
Yeah, you do.
there's
There's all,
yeah, yeah,
and so I would say, to the folks who are the naysaying it, I'd say just, have be an open mind to it, because it will be transformational, and if it's not with us, it's somewhere else.
yeah.
So that's one, and then maybe have you comment on that, Matt, and then my question to you is, like, yeah, we can talk about it. When do you predict we will make, we being, Northwest Indiana, this region, will make a big announcement of a multinational company coming to do something amazing? Year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? What do you? So on both topics, we'd
Yeah.
love to
So
hear
I'll
you.
start with the second one. Let me see if I can kind of gaze into the crystal ball here for a sec. So if I were to use the case studies and the examples that we've learned about in other markets, from the time you really start in earnest of, courting those larger investments, job creation investments, um, it can take a couple of years at best. And I think, we've seen some really good early wins. Obviously, the largest capital investment in the history of the state of Indiana with new Amazon Web Services campus in Hobart. Um, I think, you know, I wish I could say it's going to happen in 3 months. That we'll for sure. But
Totally.
when I think about Phoenix, when I think about the Carolina Research Triangle, when I think about Austin, Texas, and markets that really um, saw their own exponential growth curves, it was usually a 5 to 10 year run. Columbus, Ohio, another great example. Columbus stood up a corporate partnership called One Columbus. in the early 2010s that then over time went on just an unbelievable 10-year run where they brought Intel and they brought Anduril and Meta and Honda scaled up their investments. And the Columbus region in central Ohio saw $80 billion in new capital investment and like 150,000 net new jobs over a 10-year period. It took some time to get on the board. But once it did, then it really snowballs. And so I think we're
Transformation.
within the next 2 to 3 years, I'd say that's my best kind of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
guess based on what we see in here, of a big breakthrough. I will tell you, one of the top site selectors in the world recently, shared in a meeting that this place is starting to feel like Texas 10 years ago. So I'd say that's a really good sign.
Good.
So I think, we're seeing that early momentum. And as far as data centers go, I mean, the discussion has gotten very polarized and it's gotten very politicized. The way that I tend to talk about data centers is not necessarily as the prize themselves. I mean, yeah, tons of construction jobs on the front end, a lot of new tax revenue. The big complaint is that they don't create a lot of permanent jobs, and they use a lot of electricity. And but they are the fundamental infrastructure for a modern economy, the same way that roads and bridges and ports and airports have been for the last century. It's just adding another layer to the kind of infrastructure that places need to be competitive economically. And so when you start to zoom out and think about how data infrastructure fits into that larger strategy for economic competitiveness, I think it takes the temperature down a little bit, because if all you're doing is out saying, hey, data centers are great, everybody should get behind this project or that project, you're going to be met with a lot of skepticism. But if you can provide a really compelling argument that's backed by very sound data that shows, here's what happens, here's the multiplier that these investments have, here's what that means for your kids and grandkids. That's the work that we've been doing, that we've been coming, we're becoming increasingly public with that, to try to provide a little bit of a counter perspective to the crowd that is sort of down with data centers at all costs. So
And Matt, you have I remember hearing the amount that data center tax revenue that would go to the city of Hobart. I don't know if that's public or if you could share it,
oh,
or
sure,
can
yeah,
you,
yeah,
or is it,
yeah,
like they're doing, I'm throwing out a
yeah,
number, $10 million today.
yeah,
And like with the data center, from what I understood, it's like almost like a 10x or something like that of
yeah.
the,
It's gonna
so what's the,
dramatically increase the city budgets and the communities where these projects
but by
land.
how much? Is it 1x,
It could be
2x,
10x.
5x,
That wasn't
10x?
that's not outrageous. I mean, it
Yeah.
could be 10x.
So you may not
Um,
have, like, here's the thing, everybody who's listening. You may not have the jobs in the data center, but you have 10x, and those are going to be jobs that every
yeah,
year that
that's
are going
right.
to, if you're making, if the city budget's 10
Yeah,
million, now it's 100 million, and
yeah,
you're going to have basically 10x the jobs that are supporting the city, the infrastructure, the police, all that kind of
that's
stuff,
right.
right?
Well, and that puts the onus really
So
on,
you create jobs. I mean, that is a
yeah,
job
yeah.
creator.
Well, and the resources, a hyperscale data center is the largest taxpayer in any city, town, county where they locate. That's that's universally true. Um, the Particularly after, for several years there were a lot of incentive tools, abatements, et cetera, that sort of shifted the tax burden for a period of years. That's changed because of the rapid increase in demand. So that was an early complaint, is that, well, you're putting all these public dollars towards incentivizing projects that don't create a lot of permanent jobs. Well, they don't need the incentives so much anymore. They're paying for their own power. They're paying, they're because again, market forces have sort of
They just
forced
want to get them up and get them
uh,
up fast. There's so much
that's right.
demand
It's
for
it's
this stuff.
speed to
It's
market,
crazy.
speed to power, and it's cash they have. It's time they don't. And that's
Totally.
that's the big kind of sort of paradigm inversion that's happened.
Mm.
And I think the communities that really are thoughtful about where these projects land and how they're going to use the financial resources that come from that, it puts the onus kind of back on the community and the leaders that they elect to be good stewards of that opportunity, so that it's not,
Totally.
so it's not a slush fund that goes to waste, but something that gets reinvested in the community to improve the roads, the bridges, the parks, the schools, the job training programs, the business attraction strategy. It's, there's a lot of money floating out there. It's really how you use it. And, how you can position yourself more competitively as a region to make sure that you are a top of the list destination when a corporate site selector or large REIT or any other kind of large scale institutional capital player is looking for a place where their money is going to be safe, welcome, and productive. It's incumbent on those communities to make sure they can satisfy those conditions. So
Totally, totally. So Matt, thank you. You got a lot going on. I know you're in Arizona. I'm kind
yeah,
of here in
speaking of national
Columbia getting
parks,
ready.
I'm
I'll be
just down the
flying
road from
back
the Grand
home.
Canyon.
My
Yeah.
daughter graduating from Munster High School tomorrow on Sunday, so we'll be working my way back for that. How do the listeners out there stay connected with you, One Region, join,
Yeah.
support? How do they stay connected to you on
Yeah,
social media?
certainly encourage everyone to sort of follow our socials. We put a lot of content out, especially on LinkedIn. Our website's oneregion.com. It's a membership organization. By invitation, we have opportunities for folks to engage. There's a form on our website to fill out and get access to our mailing list. And we're always looking for new partners. Our membership has grown very steadily to a point now where folks are sort of seeking out opportunities to engage, and so it's just an exciting time. The organization has scaled both in terms of its financial capacity, but as well as its reach and its network. And so we're always open to adding new partners to our growing coalition.
Yeah, well, no, I saw your post today on the Bears and on LinkedIn. So if you're not following Matt on LinkedIn, you should definitely follow him. But yeah, a lot of great things going on in Northwest Indiana. So those who are outside of Northwest Indiana, come in, check it out. Beautiful dunes right next to Chicago. Matt, again, thanks for jumping on, making it a priority. And yeah,
It's,
we'll have
it's,
you on again. Maybe,
it's my pleasure,
maybe,
Dave.
yeah, we'll have you on soon. Have a good one.
Well, you too, my friend. Thanks.
All right.